My name's Ben Dobson, and I manage a farm called Stonehouse Farm and then a business we've set up called Hudson Hemp. 2 years ago, we received an industrial hemp application in 2017, and we've been producing CBD hemp for 2 years. My slideshow is a little bit hasty, but it's mainly going to outline really what I want to talk about is explain the difference between what's defined as industrial hemp and CBD hemp, which is kind of in its own category, and recreational marijuana. And then I'm going to show you what this looks like from a hemp perspective, a CBD hemp perspective, on the field, in the greenhouse, and in the harvest process. So you get an idea just to visualize it, which I thought might help. So I'm going to just talk about hemp first. So industrial hemp really refers to hemp that people used to say, is it sativa, rugaris, or indica? And there are 3 primary strains of the cannabis plant. There's indica, there's sativa, there's rugaris. And at this point in the United States, all of that has blended. So really the legal definition of hemp is cannabis containing less than 0.3% THC. And the USDA has just reviewed in their guidelines, it's THC-A and delta-9 THC. The difference there is delta-9 THC is bioactive, it's available. THC analog, THC-A, can turn into delta-9, but it's not active. But those 2 components put together must be under 0.3% THC for that cannabis plant to be defined as hemp. Anything over 0.3% THC is defined as marijuana and would therefore have to fit into an adult use program, and still as of today, under USDA regulations and state law, it's under 0.3%. So they just want to be very clear about how we've come here. Some people will say there's a certain, rugaris is hemp and indica is marijuana. Well, it's all mixed up in the breeding at this point. So you're really looking at that 0.3 threshold. That's how we've defined it. And so I wanted to point that out. And industrial hemp is really defined as hemp used for, they've included CBD in that definition, but I think that'll be changing. CBD hemp is legalized in the new federal farm bill. And so industrial hemp is for fiber, it's for rope, it's for clothing. It's basically for the fibers on the outside of the plant. The hurd in the middle of the plant has other industrial uses. The grain itself is a high protein, high fat grain. And then in the CBD, is, to be very clear, it collects in the flowers of the plant, in the buds of the plant. And cannabidiol is a cannabinoid just like THC. They actually both come from the same root cannabinoid called CBG. And CBG, out of the CBG comes CBD and THC, and it really depends on the parent plants. So I won't get into too much detail, but it's really important to understand the threshold and where marijuana starts and where hemp ends per our laws. I'm not saying it's the exact right way to do it, but that's what we have to work with. As a CBD farmer, what we've focused on is we're building a business, and we're also conducting research. So we're part of New York State's research program. So we've been documenting how to grow the crop, what kind of nutrient needs we have, what type of pest management, what type of fertilizer needs we need. We've also been documenting the levels of CBD we're getting, the levels of secondary cannabinoids, the yields per acre, our drying techniques, and we're now just about to begin processing. So CBD, we start in the greenhouse. These are baby cannabis plants about 2 weeks old. This is about a week later, another week later, and then they start going out on the field where they're this size. And on the field, they then go very quickly by about August 1st, you're seeing plants that are chest high. And these are the rows of the CBD plants. CBD looks very much like, it is all cannabis, just as marijuana is. Again, it's whether you're below 0.3 or over 0.3. For all intents and purposes, CBD and marijuana look the same. Here's just a little further along in maturity. This is them right before they're about to start flowering. You see the nodes by the leaves are really building up. And here they are going into full flower. And this is the point where we're really going to harvest them. They're producing a lot of CBD. You can see the sort of white crystallization along the flower. That's where the cannabinoids collect. And we also have to test every single week because CBD plants do contain a small amount of THC, and to make sure we don't go over that level, we monitor weekly and make our harvest decisions based really on what we're seeing THC levels do. This year we averaged 0.21% THC. We were under the threshold, but if we'd waited too late, we could have been over. And then that's a really straightforward thing that I need to explain to everyone, is the plant breeding isn't perfect yet. And for every unit of CBD produced, these plants still make a small amount of THC. So it's very important, the state knows this, I work closely with the state, that the testing and protocol is important. And as counties, I would alert you, it's important to be clear who your CBD producers are, and if they're reputable, because this plant looks the same, and the state does have a good testing program, but that's really a key distinction here.
What's the length of time from the seed to maturity?
Seed to maturity, we plant in May. We plant seed in May, we transplant in June, and these plants mature in September, and we like to complete our harvest during the month of October. We harvest on our farm, we cut the plants and directly load hay wagons, and then we bring them into a drying facility. That big unit you see on the left is a dehumidifier. It pulls air, removes water from the air and those metal pipes on the top, and then pumps dry air back underneath the biomass. And we hang on nets, and we use fans and dehumidification to dry the crop down. And I wanted to actually use this opportunity to just talk about what we've seen as the logistics of security. This has been a key issue that I think as counties and everyone really it's important to focus on. It's also a key issue of contention between out-of-state industrial players and farmers who are growing cannabis. The cannabis is least valuable when it's actually a big green wet plant on the field. How much of that is someone really going to get away with in their pickup truck? Dry down, break down. The cannabis gets a lot more valuable once I've dried it in the building and that work's done. And then it gets even more valuable once the CBD flower is broken off the plants and into storage. So the number one security priority is the drying space, and even beyond that, the space where your finished broken down product is secured. So as counties, I think it's very important to understand where the money sits. It's like the public is walking around with some money in our wallet, but the bank vault is what you're really protecting. And it's the similar concept in cannabis and CBD, whether it's marijuana or CBD, the most valuable location to protect is where the finished good is stored. So our security protocols on our farm or on the fields, we just have some basic cameras, a perimeter fence. It could be breached if someone is really determined, and we have it posted, and then we work with our local law enforcement to show where the fields are and have a plan. Once we go into harvest, we're dealing with locked buildings, more video surveillance, and then once the product is broken down and in totes, we really keep that locked down. So I just wanted to, as a farmer, share what our experience has been, and I thought that would be just basic nuts and bolts stuff for you folks as county administrators to understand. And so I'm really just going to talk a little more about some major issues that we see. So as a farm in New York, we've invested quite a bit into this. This crop can grow, you can create gross revenues on CBD hemp of 40 to 80,000 per acre, and the costs range between 15 and 30. So it's a very valuable crop, but that's this year. Now that it's legalized federally, and many large companies such as Canopy Growth, owned by Constellation Brands, is moving into New York, I think we'll see the value of CBD cannabis drop pretty quickly as production rises. Granted, the public's demand is rising too, so I don't think it'll be overnight, but I do think it's going to start declining. And I wanted to outline what I think that means for New York farmers. Is the state gave us a good 2-year jump to get ahead, and now we are going to see a lot of out-of-state players come in. The USDA, it still matters state to state, even though the USDA has hemp is legal. It's been legalized in the Farm Bill. But in CBD, there are particular regulations. The USDA bill makes CBD hemp regulatable. States can regulate it in their own state program. And this is because the DEA, hemp is off its scheduled list. CBD as well. But the FDA has approved a drug called Epidiolex, and the active ingredient in Epidiolex is CBD. So what this means is that if anyone is using CBD in a product and making medical claims or mislabeling it all, they're running afoul of the FDA. The other issue is the FDA has just banned the interstate commerce of foods and beverages containing CBD. And they're also moving towards, I think, an outright ban on banning CBD for use as a dietary supplement. Most companies, and the guidance given by New York State right now, is to follow the FDA's CFRs for dietary supplements in making a hemp product, making a product that contains CBD. So we're moving to a place where the DEA doesn't look at it as illegal, I'm referring to CBD, neither does the USDA, but the FDA itself is going to have is creating many regulatory issues for CBD. So some states such as California are already moving CBD into their state-regulated cannabis programs. So alongside THC, not as highly regulated because it's not psychoactive, but they're protecting it with their own state laws. That still means it's legal with the DEA, legal with the USDA, but the real issue that we're looking at in compliance terms is the FDA. There are ways to make a hemp extract that contains CBD that you can put in a product that is labeled properly. The FDA won't crack down on you, but it's pretty nuanced. And really we have interests of the medical industry, food industry, and in my own personal opinion, large companies really wanting to see more regulation so that they can find their way into the CBD. So there are conversations in if anyone reads the New York State proposal to legalize cannabis in the budget, you'll see that there are provisions to potentially bring the CBD program into the New York State cannabis program. And that's the state really moving to protect CBD production and create a New York State market. But really there are issues around it and around CBD with interstate commerce of beverages at this point, of making the wrong medical claims, and producers also need to be leery of potential changes in the dietary supplement guidelines. The FDA may just say CBD is not an eligible dietary supplement. So those are some of the key concerns around where CBD is headed in the marketplace. That being said, as an agricultural crop, we found it to be very lucrative for our farm. We're an organic grain farm. We farm about 2,000 acres. We gross $1,500 to $2,000 an acre on organic corn. So hemp has a return potential of 20 to 40 times that. So we do think that it has tremendous potential for the state. And we are in a good position in New York, even with the changes being made at the federal level. We are one of the highest population states. We have over 22 million people, and we don't come close to making enough of our own CBD yet. So even if New York State moves CBD into the New York State cannabis program, we're in a better position than a state like Kentucky or Colorado or Oregon, where they're producing large amounts of CBD. They have small populations, and if the interstate commerce of the CBD gets clamped down on, those states will fail. They'll have oversupply. We aren't in that position yet. Another key thing I think that that's important to understand is how CBD has. There's been important change in the bill to allow CBD. They made it an agricultural crop. So when it was deemed an agricultural crop, it made it so that CBD could be grown in agricultural districts, sort of affiliated with the right to farm law. In cannabis, in marijuana cannabis, there's an option in the bill for counties to opt out or opt in. The one issue is cannabis is not clearly defined as an agricultural crop or an industrial crop at this point. I personally think it should be defined as an agricultural crop. It could help the industry be New York driven, but that's a key issue to watch and to consider as county legislators is what your zoning laws are, what your districts are, and how you want to consider cannabis, whether you're for it or against it. That's a key issue is really the zoning parts of it. I do think it's a tremendous economic opportunity, but every county is different. And what else did I want to talk about? I wanted to also point out that I think in Massachusetts, the state's done a good job of defining their financial benefit from this. There's a 20% overall tax, and I believe there's a 10% local tax, or a 3% local tax, and there's a 10% equity tax. There are the 9.
They're trying.
Okay, so New York is then very similar to Massachusetts. We're looking at a small local tax and a 20% state tax. But I do think that we should be careful to look, not only is the taxes the revenue, but the more New York State-owned businesses we have in the cannabis space, the more we'll really benefit from it. Many of the larger cannabis companies are investor-owned. They're publicly traded on the Canadian Stock Exchange. And they're doing things like, well, we'll agree to have a union of cannabis workers. And what does that mean? That they're going to offer $20 an hour and pay the tax, and where does all the money end up? So I think as county regulators, and I'm sharing my opinion here, I think would be very important that we look at and prioritize New York State-owned businesses, and that we also look at equity for women, minorities, people of color, as well as farmers. If marijuana does not get zoned as an agricultural crop, then farmers are really out of the equation. And that means that cannabis is driven into metal warehouses. And that really appeals to, I'd say, the industrial model that's out there. And as a state with a very large population in New York City and a very large rural area that I'd say has agriculture in crisis, I think it's actually very important that we understand between law enforcement the security issues here, that we have a real dialogue about the safety of cannabis. And there are, like anything, marijuana can be abused, but it also can be used. And I also think that we need to look at who owns the businesses in New York and how do we regulate this. And some of the key stumbling blocks are really going to be zoning. If this can be zoned as an agricultural crop and can be farmed in agricultural districts, then the doors open for a lot more of New York to supply New York City, which is one of the largest markets in the world. If not, it'll end up being like many other models where this gets driven into warehouses. You're looking at much more investment usually from out-of-state entities, and New Yorkers we could get some tax money and jobs out of it, but it doesn't necessarily become a New York-driven industry. So as a farmer, I'd really encourage everyone to think that through thoroughly. And there's so much more I'd like to say, but I just want to thank you for the opportunity, and I'll field some questions later. Thank you.